What's a shady company secret you kept quiet to save your job, but now you're done being loyal and ready to spill the tea? Story 1. I worked for a sleep diagnostic company during both the SARS and swine flu outbreaks of the mid-2000s. It wasn't a lab, but a company that developed the hardware and software installed in sleep labs and hospitals throughout North America. Hospital sleep labs were almost always located in the respiratory care wing. We had a team of technicians whose job was to travel to hospitals and install the equipment. During SARS, Toronto was locked down, and air travel in and out was almost completely banned. We had a tech who lived in downtown Toronto. Instead of recognizing the seriousness of the situation, the company had this guy drive to another city, usually Ottawa, and fly out of there to bypass the flying ban. Just before swine flu really hit the news, something swept through our office. People were really sick. Our traveling technicians were all forced out onto planes and into respiratory care wings of hospitals across the continent. Anyone who complained was told to shut up and do their jobs. Swine flu made several rounds through the office, and these guys were always traveling while sick. So yeah, my company helped spread two nasty viruses directly to hospital departments, loaded with people who were by definition very vulnerable to the effects of said viruses. Before we continue, do us a quick favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I used to work for a third-party medical device testing facility that did both in vitro and in vivo testing. About 25 years ago, a contact lens company sent in a lot of lenses to be tested. These are done in vivo on rabbits. I worked in data entry at the time and got the data for processing before it went to QA. This batch of lenses failed irritation and sensitivity. As the data entry person, I have to sign the report. The study director came to me and said the error came from his department, and the decimal point needed to move. I refused, because that is not the data I was provided. I suggested the study be redone, but it costs about $12,000 to redo. I was pressured to change the data and sign the report and pass on to QA. I quit instead. Maybe you heard about a popular contact lens company causing mass eye infections in the early 2000s? And oh, I almost forgot. After this, I did a stint as an insurance broker for the worst boss ever. He would scream and berate every employee. I couldn't take it, and I quit. He chased me out of the building. I threatened to call 911 if he did not let me get in my car. He called me the next day and begged me to come back. I agreed, but for a $10,000 pay increase, work from home, and all our conversation via email in writing. It went well for a while, and then the emails stopped. The company shut down because he was arrested for hiring a hitman to off his wife. The hitman was an undercover. From jail, he tried to have the undercover and a witness killed. Story 3. I worked as a private security for people who make millions per year. Among them were church pastors, preachers, and other so-called religious men, and these religious men like the drugs and the youngest girls. Despite having so much to lose, they are stingy when it comes time to pay. There are movie stars, music makers, and other super rich people who live in regular houses, drive crappy cars, and live in your communities as the person next door. The creepy house on your block that has the weirdo stranger watching you from behind drawn blinds and only goes out at night. It is because whoever lived there does not want to be recognized. 90% of my guard duty for these people was to dress like a bum and deal with services providers like phone men, internet and cable, landscapers, make sure the house was stocked with food and drink, and to accept packages. One of our clients had an 800-square-foot hidey hole that looked like a rundown trailer house on the outside where she would watch movies, eat pizza, and talk with the assigned guard all night long. We had another trio of musicians who had a 3-bedroom townhouse, and they would crash there to write songs, and the guard was the one ordering the food and running fetch errands. Story 4. The chief executive officer of the company was having an affair with the administrative assistant. He would take her on so-called business trips to visit clients and potential clients, where they shared a hotel room. Eventually, his wife discovered the affair and confronted him, right in the office. The assistant left the company soon after, and I was given the unfortunate task of sanitizing her laptop and mobile phone. I came across emails between the two of them, along with messages to a friend where she vented that he wouldn't leave his wife for her. The phone also had photos I truly wish I'd never seen. The same CEO had a company credit card with a limit of £7,000, which the owner of the company paid off in full each month without question. The CEO took full advantage of this, maxing out the card every single month, and never provided any details or receipts explaining what the money was spent on. That same CEO relocated the development team and myself to the United Arab Emirates under the pretense of saving money. However, during the financial banking collapse in the 2000s, he stopped paying us altogether. Despite having enough funds to pay both himself and the team, he chose to only pay himself and still expected us to continue working without compensation. That same CEO dismissed the chief operating officer by telling him, "I have to fire you because I can't afford to lose my job. I have a mortgage." The same CEO is still in charge of the company who basically stopped building our own software and just hosts another company's stuff. It's a loss leader for the owner to reduce his tax liability. Story 5. If you worked with stem cell differentiation factors from a certain part of New York before 2016, it's entirely possible they were contaminated by one guy who thought it was okay for years to pipette directly from the reagent bottle and pour unused liquid back in. He didn't bother checking the chemical compatibility of the pipette he was using and ignored many basic lab protocols. He was their lead scientist, and honestly, he was an idiot. On top of that, all the interns were from the same junior college, unpaid, because some clueless executive, the founders hired, set up a pipeline of not-so-great students from his own alma mater. The lab also completely failed to teach basic lab safety, so people were regularly getting DCM on their skin despite it being carcinogenic and mutagenic. Meanwhile, the head of research and the executives were constantly backstabbing each other, claiming credit for ideas behind each other's backs. When they finally hired me to fix their long-standing problems, which they'd been trying to solve for years by hiring and firing people, I managed to do it in just 3 months. That ended up making them look like they never had any issues with the product they were selling in the first place. So, if you worked in a lab using stem cell differentiation factors before 2016, I'm sorry to say, your data and samples were probably heavily contaminated. After 2016, things got cleaned up and are fine. P.S. That 8-year NDA should have been a huge red flag from the start. But hey, I needed the job, and they needed someone with my skill set. Story 6. Not using names because this can come back to bite me in the butt. The owners at my previous place of employment were committing fraud and likely have a tax evasion scheme going on. 2 owners, Jack and Bob, owned 50-50, but each also ran several side companies independently or with other people. One owner would buy products for the main company, let's call it Robco, and then buy those same products from Robco for one of his side companies at a price much lower than what Robco originally paid. This caused the side company to take a loss. He would then sell those products at a higher price until they stopped selling or were near expiration, like dog food. After that, he would sell the products back to Robco for more than the side company originally paid. This cycle shifted money and losses between the companies in a way that seemed designed to hide profits and manipulate taxes. One time, Robco purchased a trailer full of brand-name outdoor equipment. Months passed, and the shipment never arrived at the company. We were repeatedly told it was delayed. Later, we discovered that one of the owners had diverted the delivery to one of his side companies and sold the equipment there instead. The other owner, Bob, knew about some of what was going on, and they often argued over it. However, Bob could never prove much because Jack manipulated invoices or simply didn't use them. Many of their purchases from suppliers had no formal paperwork, relying instead on phone calls and in-person meetings. Bob was stuck because he couldn't run the business without Jack. Jack held all the important sales contacts. But Bob wasn't exactly a saint either. His buildings were riddled with OSHA and health code violations, yet inspections somehow always passed, leading us to suspect he was paying off the fire marshal. Employees often complained about freezing temperatures because Bob refused to pay for proper heating. The buildings had holes in the floors, major roof leaks, and mouse infestations. He even tried to use unpaid child labor, disguised as school volunteering, but some workers pushed back and threatened to quit. On top of that, he was manipulating the books through an account linked to Pakistan. Bob had a pattern of buying businesses, running them into the ground, and squeezing every last bit of value out before moving on. Story 7. I worked for a supermarket in Philadelphia. One day we had some guy come in drugged out of his mind. He ran up to our pharmacy just inside the doors on the left side. One of the first things you would pass, unless you went into the produce section ahead of you, and started screaming at our pharmacist about being chased by dragons and needing help. The pharmacist tried to calm him down and call for help, but the guy went into the store's customer bathroom adjacent to the pharmacy and locked himself in. Police were called and eventually showed up. They got the door open just in time to see the guy's legs disappearing into the drop ceiling. What nobody realized right away is that the area above the ceiling tiles provides full access to the entire store. Cops went up after him and were trying to talk him down. They tried to mace and pepper spray him out, but he kept dodging them until they eventually got him cornered. At that point, the fire department was also there, and unlike the police, they decided they weren't screwing around anymore, so they just used their giant metal pokers to bust out the ceiling. The guy was standing on, knocking him out, and the 10 or so feet to the ground of the cart vestibule where he was medically attended to and promptly arrested. The reason I bring all of this up, when he was messed, or pepper sprayed, or tear gassed, not sure what they used, it was directly above the prepared food section, specifically the wing bar. Once things settled down, I mentioned this to management and said that we'd need to throw out and replace all of the food that had been contaminated. The air, alone, was chokingly thick with whatever they used, so it was absolutely coating the exposed food, and I was told to shut up and not worry about it. Never bought anything from grocery store prepared foods again. Story 8. As a teenager, I worked at Taco Bell for a few weeks. During that time, corporate introduced a ridiculous new policy about hand sanitizer use. No more washing hands, just constant sanitizer. We'd often use 10 pumps, lightly rub, and then go straight into handling the lettuce. It was awful. After I quit, the manager and most of the staff also left. The gay assistant manager quit after a 13-year-old employee pulled a .38 caliber gun on him for being gay. The same teenager then showed up to collect his paycheck on Friday with the gun, where the police arrested him. Sadly, that probably meant the 13-year-old missed a lot of Mensa meetings after that. Then the district, regional or area manager, gave the job of manager to her stupid, obese friend. All this woman did was eat. After a year of job hunting, I found out she had been lying to companies I applied to by listing Taco Bell as her previous employer. The first place I applied to without listing any previous employers actually hired me. She eventually got fired for being worthless and eating half the stock. After that, no one wanted to take the manager's job, so they hired the 17-year-old who had been fired before I started. He was let go for stealing. So yeah, that was Taco Bell, at least back then. Oh, and if you say F you, and have a nice day, almost every customer just says thanks and goes on eating. I had one woman who wasn't sure what I said. Demonstrating this to other employees would entertain them for hours. One dumb guy wanted to try it himself and said, F you. And have a nice day. Customers definitely noticed and complained to the manager. The dumb guy got talked to but wasn't fired. Not me, but I had a friend who worked at Sam's Club. Yes, the one started by Sam Walton, back in the late 1980s. He said he watched a forklift driver raise a pallet of canned goods all the way to the top of one of the rows and then shove it in, pushing all the other pallets down. Since the top row was full, one pallet fell off the far end and tragically crushed a customer to death. Everyone immediately fled the scene. I asked him why he didn't go to see if he could help, and he said, "It is corporate policy that if you injure a customer, everyone must leave the area and hide, because offering assistance is an admission of guilt." Hopefully, they've changed that policy by now. Walmart isn't evil, right? They'd change that, wouldn't they? If you have white landscapers, they are probably racist, sexist, or under the influence of alcohol or drugs. And yes, some of them may also be PDF files. For example, we had one crew with a guy named Larry who spent the first 2 hours of every shift vomiting. Crew would jokingly play Guess Larry's Dinner by trying to figure out what he'd thrown up. Yeah, he spent the first 2 hours of every day vomiting instead of working. They also intentionally comp themselves out of work, usually by trying to lift a boulder that even Hathor would avoid. Oh, and if you work there, you'll be soaked with every toxic chemical known to man. We joked about how messed up our genes must be and what eldritch horrors we might father. And women banging with landscapers? That only happened to one foreman once in all the years I worked there while paying my way through college. Man, so many war stories from that place. It was like working with people the carnival wouldn't even take. Your shipper might not handle your packages very carefully. Of course, if you've had a lot of deliveries, you've probably already figured that out. Oh, and finally, if you're moving safes, or anything super heavy like 5-ton safes, you never wear steel toe boots. If something goes wrong, the steel toe can actually cut your toes off as it fuses with them. Soft toe boots only, if you want a future where your piggies go to market. Story 9. I worked in management for Kmart in the early 2000s, specifically in the loss prevention department at the store level. The core of my job was pretty straightforward. Lead a team of anti-shoplifting agents, identify internal theft by employees, and go through the motions of caring about other types of losses that affected the company, though that part was mostly tedious paperwork. At its heart, the role was about justifying your salary by demonstrating return on investment. But beyond the numbers, it had a strong moral component, right versus wrong, a real cops and robbers kind of job. I worked there for a few years and was doing okay, moving around to different locations. Eventually, I was transferred to a newer store. Things took a turn when I received a complaint about viruses on the HR training computers. The situation was pretty bad. Handling IT issues wasn't really part of my job, but this was a specific kind of virus causing constant pop-ups with inappropriate content. These computers were used to train new hires, mostly young women, on how to operate the registers. The pop-ups were relentless, and that's how I first got tipped off. I asked my agents to keep an eye on the training room and keep me informed about what was going on. They were a great group, honest, straightforward, and hard-working guys who genuinely cared about keeping society polite and honest. Plus, they were really good at catching shoplifters and thieves. I miss those guys. My agents tipped me off about the store manager, the top guy at the entire Walmart-sized store, and how he'd eat lunch in that training room. The HR manager, who was his close friend, acted as the gatekeeper for that space. She was a very large woman, not that there's anything wrong with that, but she used her size to intimidate. She was in charge of the area, and you definitely didn't want to upset the HR manager who controlled your paycheck. She would run interference for the manager while he had lunch there. Keep in mind, he had his own private office where he could have eaten like a normal person. I had an office too, one that no one outside my regional office had keys to. It included an interview room where we processed shoplifters, plus a back room. It wasn't exactly a private office. It was more like a surveillance hub, with cameras covering every corner of the property. That's where my team spotted issues and coordinated our responses. Everything was meticulously recorded on side tapes. Yes, we had digital recordings as well, but the tapes served as a hard copy backup in case of failure. However, we didn't have any surveillance in the training room. So, I set out to fix that. The idea of some pervs soloing off on the computers, where 16-year-old girls were learning to operate registers, to watch inappropriate content, just didn't sit right with me. It felt like a betrayal, not only of the company I worked for, but of those poor kids as well. I called a meeting with my team. They understood the stakes and knew this wasn't exactly part of the saving the company money job description, but like me, they couldn't just let it go. I stayed overnight with an employee and good friend who I'm still very close with to this day. I ran 200 feet of cable to send a covert camera signal from that part of the store to our operations center, which we boringly called the camera room. The camera was perfect, a pinhole cam, hidden in a ceiling tile. You could see the screen and the monitor clearly. But the guy I brought along accidentally left something from his pocket, a bullet from the shooting range he'd been at earlier. The store manager, with his paranoid soloing off at work instincts, found it by accident and discovered the covert camera installation we had set up. It turned into a total mess. I had to fire the guy who left the bullet, and the manager knew we were onto him. He stopped his activity for a couple of months. During that time, I didn't tell anyone I was working on a new installation. I managed to install a pinhole camera right in the dot of a lowercase I on a training poster across the room. Months went by, and then he started up again. But I still couldn't catch him. I had to catch him. It was disgusting, perverted, and wrong. He would check the ceiling tiles with his back turned. The camera I installed could only capture him coming and going. I could see his back but not what was on the screen. So, I came up with a clever solution. I ran a VGA, computer screen capture line from the monitor to the camera line I had previously installed. This guy knew there was a camera, but he never bothered to check where the power and signal lines were located. I found a signal box that could combine the two video feeds onto a single line. This setup allowed me to switch between the two views, seeing both who was sitting there and what was displayed on the screen. I had laid the perfect trap. I set the system to switch between feeds automatically every few seconds. After just one day, I caught that piece of trash red-handed. I reported it to corporate immediately and made copies of the footage as insurance. A total crap show followed. I was fired quickly. Turns out the manager who was caught doing the turkey jerky was friends with the head, a vice president of HR for the company. They got rid of me fast and asked me at least 20 times if I had another copy of the tape. I said no, but I actually did. Here's my favorite part. I kept the tape. Didn't I, Scott? You sick, disgusting piece of crap. Also, Green Bay frigging sucks. Watching you turn red and almost have a heart attack was one of the greatest pleasures of my time at that miserable company. They closed their doors about 2 years later, and then Sears folded after having bought Kmart a few years earlier. If you ever wondered what happened to those two companies and why they're now just history, well, that's the kind of stuff that explains it. Story 10. I worked on a documentary TV series about paranormal activity. The show started off as a show exposing various online videos that claimed to have evidence of ghosts, aliens, etc. The idea was to have experts look at the videos and figure out possible non-paranormal explanations. Figuring out what those weird lights in the sky actually are, or working out how people could have made hoax ghost videos, etc. Very early on, that premise was abandoned and it turned into another standard collection of spooky videos without any real substance in the commentary. The reasons were, it was a lot cheaper to not have to hire any experts. It was a lot easier to write because absolutely no real analysis was necessary. Someone just literally talks about what's happening on screen. Licensing video clips from people is a lot harder if they know you're planning to expose them as frauds. If when they figured out what we were doing they'll pull out. Market research suggested that the standard paranormal stuff would get a bigger audience than a party pooper. Let's use science to show it's fake show. I get that this is more entertaining to people, but it's worth bearing in mind that when people say things like no one can explain that, someone actually might be able to explain it, but it's often more profitable not to. Story 11. You might think defense contracting works like this. A global conflict arises, the government decides to intervene, then reaches out to a defense contractor for weapons to help restore peace. The contractor then develops those weapons based on the specifics of the conflict. But what actually happens much more often is a defense contractor uses internal funds to develop new weapons systems in advance. Then they actively look for potential global conflicts where those weapons could be deployed, using well-placed government contacts. They pitch the capabilities of these weapons, often urging escalation under the pretense of innovation or national security. The government, influenced by these presentations, may then push for involvement or intensify the situation. Meanwhile, defense contractor shareholders profit enormously, sometimes making millions. Rinse and repeat. I've sat in those presentations. They're completely devoid of morality. Story 12. Safety first only applies when it hurts their profit margins. I worked at an industrial site where they repeated this constantly. There was a large tool cabinet that was on unsteady ground that everyone was complaining about, as it would teeter every time someone opened or closed it. The company wouldn't do anything about it. One day it fell on someone and killed them. Suddenly, the company was all, "This was a preventable accident, and we should all do better," naturally shifting the blame everywhere but themselves. The death was never reported on in the news, and we were encouraged not to talk about it out of respect for the family. Not gonna say what company it was, because I don't want to get sued. Let's just say they're pretty gassy, and you find them a lot on the beach. Story 13. I worked at a pharmacy, and fairly frequently, one or multiple pills would be dropped on the dirty as crap floor back there, and they were always just picked up and thrown back into the stock bottle or into the prescription we were filling. I hated this, but I was in no position to argue. I made my disgust and disapproval known after I dropped a pill for the first time and asked what to do with it. I also worked at a regional fast food chain. People raved about our mashed potatoes and gravy. They both literally came from the same pouches of powdered potatoes and gravy you can buy at the store. We dump a pouch and hot water into a serving dish, mix it up and send it to the front. Also, don't assume the outsides of your food containers at fast food places, like bags, chicken boxes, etc., are clean. The insides are probably clean enough, but the outsides aren't meticulously kept in sanitary conditions. This is especially true of sauce packets and cups. Those frequently got dropped on the floor, which was much dirtier than the floor at the pharmacy, and thrown right back into their containers. I used to suck the last bits of sauce out of packets sometimes, and now I wonder how much fast food restaurant floor grime I ate. At the same fast food restaurant, we'd wipe down the trays with an old bucket of sanitizer. I never learned what it actually was. And an old rag. The sanitizer and rags are supposed to be changed frequently, but they almost never were changed even close to as often as they should been. We also used those same rags and buckets of sanitizer to go out and wipe down the tables and seating. We weren't supposed to reuse them for trays after that, but people frequently did. So the same rag that was used to wipe down the seats where dozens or hundreds of people sat their dirty, stinky butts and regularly put their feet on was also used to wipe down the tables and the trays, in and out of the same sanitizer, and then just marinating all day. The paper tray liners are likely clean enough to eat off, but if they are wet from the trays and not drying after last cleaning, they're contaminated. I also do not eat any food that touches the bare tray. Story 14. At the Papa John's I worked at, they never cleaned the metal grates or plates where pizzas were cooked in the oven. When I asked about how often they got washed, I was told something like, "Nah, they're pre-seasoned, and the heat kills off any bacteria anyway." Even worse, if a grate or plate fell on the floor, they'd just drop it into a bin beneath the oven, where it would sit, presumably waiting to be reused repeatedly. Even though I was a driver, whenever it was my turn to handle the dishes, I never saw any of those grates or plates back in the sink or anywhere nearby. I get the heat kills germs mindset, and I know our immune systems are usually pretty resilient, but seeing it firsthand and hearing that excuse still felt kind of off. Along the same vein, the pizza makers at the Papa John's I worked at didn't wear gloves. I was a bit surprised at first, but then I understood how much waste using gloves constantly would create. Plus, there was a sink right by the assembly counter with either soap or sanitizer. I wasn't around that area much, so I'm not sure which, so frequent hand washing was expected instead. So, all in all, as we all know, general rule of thumb, if you're super squeamish about germs and cleanliness, you're better off just making your own food. Maybe this has been brought up before, but if not, I feel people at least deserve to or have the right to know. Story 15. I used to work at Best Buy. Sales of big-name brand products, especially Apple, often brought in very low profits for the company. Because of that, the biggest sales metric they focused on was signing customers up for their incredibly predatory credit card. My managers would constantly bark orders at me over the earpiece to push credit cards specifically to non-English speakers, knowing they were less likely to fully understand the terms and conditions. They made sure we told these customers they didn't need a social security number as long as they had a tax identification number. In my area, a lot of undocumented people ended up getting scammed this way, probably going into debt just from charging a PS4 and a game. Needless to say, I was the most mediocre salesperson on paper because even though I could sell literally any product in the store and often had the highest number of transactions per shift, I refused to push credit cards unless customers specifically asked. Some people would come in planning to buy those fancy $4,000 Samsung fridges with the touchscreen and hand me a stack of cash, and my boss would still try to get me to sign them up for a credit card, Like, dude, if they have that much cash in their pocket, I don't know how much they need that credit card for the most expensive product in the department. Story 16. The entire coal industry runs on false laboratory results. Sometimes the results are adjusted subtly by the uncertainty of measurement. Sometimes they are outright lies. Millions of dollars turn on these results. The labs aren't bribed directly, but they are heavily influenced by the implication of whether they are hired again. This isn't so much a secret as an industry expectation. It broke in the media a decade ago when one incoming lab CEO spilled the beans. The only new truth is that the companies that denied doing it were all lying, including mine. A few media statements, a few clutched pearls, and it all went away, except the cheating. That just got codified into standard adjustment practices. I was nearly sacked for refusing to make the adjustments until I pointed to the clause in the Code of Ethics that specifically banned the adjustments. Amusingly, that clause was removed a few years later. Story 17. Phase Technologies. They produce three-phase machines and motor starters. If you work in the plumbing, oil, heavy equipment like lathes, AC, etc., or most certainly in the farming industries, you may have heard them. They primarily focus their sales in farming industries to work on pivots and pumps. But did you know? Anytime they release a new product, they have most certainly not tested it enough in real-world conditions. Basically, knowing that the product that can cost thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars will malfunction, break, or catastrophically fail in less than a week from delivery. Furthermore, you want to buy a warranty at a premium price of $600 or more? Guess what? You won't get any repair parts sent out to you. Plus, we don't have any service members that can come out to you to fix your 100,000 pieces of equipment you just broke. Nope, you have to pay to send it to us, that is, on your dime, and if we deem the issue to have been caused by you through whatever arbitrary nonsense we just make up, guess what? Your warranty is invalid, and you now have to pay to get it shipped back to you. Oh wait, there is more. Did you buy one of the motor drivers for your garage door or something? Well, you see, they advertise that the 3-amp or 5-amp model can drive your door, but really you'll need a 30-amp driver, even though your machine is rated for far less. So don't trust what they have on their site, whether it be warranty, details, or even price. Seriously, this was the scummiest company I've ever had the pleasure to work for, and I am glad that I no longer work for them. Story 18. When you call for an ambulance, chances are there's a crew around the corner from you, but they have marked themselves as being unavailable for a call so they can chill or text or do whatever they want. The reason you're waiting 60+ minutes for an ambulance is because nobody wants to do their job, and the company is so scared of the union that they won't hold people accountable. Urban area serviced by for-profit EMS company that holds the exclusive contract for that municipality. Oh, might do also. Just because you arrive to the ER in an ambulance doesn't mean you'll be seen any quicker. In fact, sometimes it takes longer. If you can drive yourself to urgent care instead, if it's truly an emergency, the urgent care folks will arrange transport and call ahead to the ED, where you'll be prioritized upon arrival. Story 19. I used to run a whiskey bar in Canberra, Australia. The venue had been around for about 10 years and was pretty well known. After working there for 3.5 years, I can say the owners were awful people. They would refill a $2,000 bottle of whiskey with cheap $50 whiskey and pretend nothing happened. They made full-time staff work 50+ hour weeks but only paid them for 38 hours, no overtime at all. A few staff took mental health leave, and the owners would make them redundant shortly after. If anyone spoke up about these practices, they were quickly fired for so-called hostile work behavior. It was pretty disgusting. After I left, I told anyone who would listen, I'm just glad there are better places to go now. Story 20. I worked for a British car insurance company. Private car insurance is just a legally mandated scam. It doesn't matter how good of a driver you are. The rates are just algorithms based on a lot of things out of your control. Crashes in your area last year. Model of car, your occupation. You aren't allowed to tell customers that the company always wants to protect its rating factors from the public, so people don't get pissed off when they realize what a pointless ripoff it is. There was a scandal where my company was being accused of being racist when a Middle Eastern gentleman did different quotes with fake names to compare prices. Quotes with Arabic-sounding names like Muhammad Ali versus super white-sounding names like John Smith. Every time, the white names produced way cheaper quotes, brown names way more expensive. It made headlines, looked very bad. The company tried to cagily do damage control but couldn't actually explain this in detail publicly because of the fierce corporate ratings secrecy. Now that I don't work there, I'll explain. This wasn't actually targeted racism by the company, in fact. It was just a prime example of how indiscriminate the algorithm is. You see, neither the John Smiths or the Muhammad Alis that the customer made quotes for were real people, so all the personal info and driving history on the quotes was fake. If you are a real person with a driving history, it's all in the system, and everything about you from your birthday, marital status, home location, occupation, work location, vehicles, etc., is known and will be a factor. If a person isn't real, the system is pulling data on random other people with that name or with similar data and extrapolating it. If there's more John Smiths with better driving records, it will extrapolate that data, and if there's more Muhammad Alis with worse records, it will extrapolate that. The fake quotes represent data extrapolated from many other people, but real quotes will often do the same. You're paying for the good or bad driving habits of innumerable others. Story 20. I used to work at Best Buy. 1. Non-commission sales doesn't mean crap. The floor guy trying to sell you a service plan is made to with no benefit to them. That's true. The department managers, however, do collect bonuses based on the high margin sales and SPIs that certain products carry. They ride the employees relentlessly trying to get them to sell the high margin stuff because it makes them more money. 2. Big box stores often have slightly different model numbers on competitive products made just for them, so they never have to match price even when something is effectively the same. Also, this is how Best Buy had printers made for them that didn't include USB cables, so they could sell you a $30 gold-plated monster cable. Customers would get so angry if they just grabbed one off the shelf and got home and couldn't even plug it in that they were told to never let somebody get a printer themselves. 3. The warehouse was free for all. Odds are your laptop was thrown, kicked, hit the floor many times before you ever took it home. 4. The interview process had a personality test. They would ask the same questions multiple times to ensure that people who weren't sure what answer the store wanted would likely screw up eventually. 5. They drug test, but everyone who works there is on drugs. 6. Only buy a product replacement plan if you're the extended warranty type. The service plans are loaded with hassles and external contracting and sometimes take weeks or months. It's all designed to be cheap for them and reduce the likelihood you'll ever take advantage of it. 7. I once saw a customer at the customer service counter just berating the service team and managers about a relatively common mistake, can't remember what. Eventually, they ended up giving her a new laptop just to get her out of the store. I don't recommend or condone this, but I did witness it. 8. They have a shrink budget annually where they expect X amount of dollars to get stolen or damaged and just be taken as a loss. They turn the employees into a bunch of narcs for the whole year because they promise to split the remaining shrink budget as an annual bonus across the staff. It ends up being something relatively insignificant, like $300. 9. If you want to know what the margin on an item is, just pretend you're an employee from another store and ask an employee if they'll do an employee price check for you. They will rarely ask for credentials or an employee number and will just do it. Their discount for working there is the store's cost plus 5%. Story 21. The university I used to work for has a method to locate any device on campus using only the Wi-Fi network and some custom software developed by a group of students. It's frighteningly accurate, down to within about a 5-foot radius inside buildings and about a 15-foot radius outside. We could look up any student's ID number and pinpoint the location of any device they had registered on the network at any given time. Also, despite campus policy, we know you've set up your own wireless network in your dorm room. No, naming it something like HP printer doesn't hide it. We regularly drove around campus on golf carts with test gear that told us whether something was actually an HP printer or just a sneaky Wi-Fi hotspot you set up. No, we didn't really care unless we got complaints about slow network speeds or dropped connections. Story 22. I didn't sign an NDA, so kinda screw it, but I was working in the kitchen of a very famous international hotel chain in one of their airport hotels in the Netherlands. Everything was pretty standard. They claim to champion internal hiring. They don't. They claim to care for the community. Food was thrown out every day because of government regulations, and there was not a single effort or initiative to change that. If you worked a menial job, you could end up working in another white-collar department. If you tried hard enough, not a chance. Your manager knows his department is understaffed, and for that reason alone, your applications get soft-blocked, and so on and so forth. These didn't trouble me. I was trying to survive at the time. What really frigging bothered me, though, was when I got headbutt by a very violent trainee and I was made to feel like I was the problem. He already caused quite a few issues with other colleagues all around the hotel, mit intimidated female colleagues in corridors, bumping onto other male colleagues, trying to start fights, knowing that if somebody retaliated, he would get a golden ticket for life, etc. Some of these were on camera. Me getting a headbutt wasn't. I was much bigger than him and had some martial arts training. So, the moment he hit me, I didn't even feel it. I was just taken back by the audacity of doing something like this, in the Netherlands, at work. I reported it to our department director immediately. It was a Friday afternoon. Don't call the police. Don't cause a ruckus. I will deal with this personally on Monday. We informed HR as well. On the coming Monday, my eyes were opened. The HR department manager sat me down and blamed me because I was his supervisor. She also said, "I don't see anything on your face. You're okay. And the gem, it's your job to work with whomever we tell you to work with, so you're working together again." Fast forward, I started scratching the surface and saw a lot more happening due to the HR manager being a vile bitch. A female colleague got set a quote D by another colleague who was under the influence from alcohol he was supposed to be serving at an event. Our colleagues witnessed it and, of course, of the HR manager did nothing, swept it under the rag, and life moved on. The girl left a few months later. I left a few months later after that. I do not want to believe that this happened, because neither me nor the other girl or any other colleague who got affected by that HR manager are Dutch. And I mean this, even if they did respond to issues like these way differently and faster when Dutch colleagues were involved. I just couldn't live with myself working for people who can take matters like these seriously. Story 23. I worked for a money management company that was basically a group of tax attorneys helping the wealthy avoid paying taxes. They specialized in clients who concealed liquid assets from Uncle Sam. These clients would sequester anywhere from $60,000 to $1 million a year and continue doing this for 2 or 3 decades. Then, when they got older, they'd finally have all those unspent assets burning a hole in their pockets. Then they knew they were going to die soon, but had assets they couldn't use because they'd have to explain where the money came from. Often, the money was hidden from everyone, including their own family. The company took its time processing transactions. If the client died and the company had access to assets only the client knew about, the company kept them. Often, it was only $8 or $9 million, but sometimes it was much more. These clients were bitter, hate-filled men who worked their whole life to make a fortune. They didn't want their family to get their hidden reserves, so they ended up hiding their money from themselves. Imagine being worth tens of millions, but you worked so long and hard you never spend a dime on yourself. Story 24. I once worked for a local political candidate who campaigned against cronyism and corruption, particularly regarding contracts between private companies and the municipality. However, I soon noticed that she herself was involved in a questionable contract where her best friend was hired as a subcontractor at an inflated rate, despite lacking the necessary experience and without a proper RFP or fair hiring process. When I started asking questions about her involvement, she let me go. So, in short, even folks who take the moral high ground publicly, especially politicians, can be complete hypocrites. My advice for anyone working in any environment but participant politics: Allow actions to speak louder than words. I know there's already a collective understanding that politicians tend to exaggerate and lie, but if you suspect something is really off, like to the extent of criminality or corruption or fraud, it likely is. Don't get involved. Report it when appropriate, and peace out before getting involved in it. Story 25. When COVID forced me to close my interior design business, I did a short stint at a couple of big-name box stores doing kitchen and bath design. I was required to push products that offered bigger kickbacks and upsell stuff with a limited warranty, so the stores wouldn't have to deal with problems a year down the line when things inevitably went south. You can buy your own cabinetry online from companies like RTA and upgrade to thicker boxes, better hinges, and even get a lifetime warranty that covers you if the product is defective. Most cabinetry websites these days offer tools that let you design your own space using their exact products and provide options to upgrade to more durable materials. You can even print out the renderings as elevations to take to any big box store for price comparisons or share with an independent designer. Also, we were consistently told to push questionable countertops like solid surface because we could mark them up to the same price as granite and claim they'd last longer. To be clear, you cannot place a hot pot directly on any surface except concrete, and even then I wouldn't recommend it. Solid surface countertops will need replacing sooner since they are known to warp and discolor, and although scratches can technically be buffed out, you'll end up paying more than it's worth to fix them. Quartz countertops like the Cambria brand aren't real stone. They're made from resin and glitter. They're terribly overpriced, and I guarantee that at least half of what you're paying is markup unless you buy directly from a fabricator. If you need to get countertops from a box store and don't like the look of high-definition laminate, go with granite. You can buy an inexpensive bucket of sealant, or ask your installer to sell you some in a spray bottle. This way, you'll end up with a far better, much more durable product because it's real stone. A fabricator will usually give you a lifetime warranty that may include resealing it again in 5 to 10 years. Also, always ask for a contractor discount and never mention that it's for your own home. P.S. If you ever need to return cabinets or similar items to big box stores like Schmoem Schmeepot, just load them up in your truck, bring your receipt, and take it straight to a manager. Don't take no for an answer. They're required to accept returns and will most likely resell the items later. Story 26. I worked for a healthcare company that provided hospice services, and it opened my eyes to the business side of dying. What surprised me most was how much larger the sales and marketing department was compared to the clinical and nursing staff. Every patient enrolled in hospice meant significant payments from Medicare and Medicaid. The hospice representatives who explained the benefits and support were actually earning bonuses of around $1,500 for each patient they signed up. While hospice care is truly valuable for terminal patients needing pain relief and comfort, it was unsettling to learn that daily sales calls were made to ensure the staff were talking patients into care almost like selling a product. When I left that side of healthcare, the reimbursement rate was about $45,000 per patient for a 90-day period, no matter how long the patient actually stayed in care. Whether a patient lived 10 hours after enrollment or the full 90 days, the company still received the full payment. They even encouraged enrolling patients who were very close to death to maximize profit. I truly respect the care hospice nurses and support staff provide, but the greed I witnessed made me question everything about the American healthcare system. Story 27. A majority of the credit card rewards programs are managed by a third-party vendor in Columbus, Ohio, which enforces much higher security standards than the credit card companies themselves. This includes background checks, credit checks, a paperless environment, security cameras, restricted system permissions, keycard access areas. Everything is automatically documented and securely stored. However, when I was a supervisor there, we merged the front-end customer-facing and back-end fulfillment departments into one large facility. The following year, it was discovered that the fulfillment department had been storing prepaid Visa, Amazon, Best Buy, and many other gift card numbers and PINs in an unrestricted and unprotected Excel sheet. We found out because customers were calling in to report that their new gift cards had $0 available. Apparently, someone in the fulfillment department opened an email and downloaded a virus. Our company lost almost $200,000 before the issue was resolved. While the customer-facing department never had a data breach, our HR department accidentally sent all employees' social security numbers, salaries, and personal information to a spoofed version of our CEO's email address. Despite all the focus and training we gave them, it was a real challenge convincing our front-end team that upper management and everyone else at OMP weren't just a bunch of a-holes playing professional, all while giving away the company's money and information. Story 28. I worked at a casino that had the vault separated from the parking lot by an uninsulated, non-load-bearing empty wall with sheetrock on one side and a stucco surface on the outside. On any given day, the vault contained several million in small bills, but I've seen that room with a mid-eight-figure sum after a big weekend. They've changed the layout now, but for a while there, the only protection that room had were cameras and obscurity. Story 29. At Comcast, if you were ever unable to pay your bills, we would set up payment plans. You were required to make a minimum payment to keep your service active, but that payment could be deferred to a later date. If you were polite, we could also waive up to $100. You needed a representative with the right knowledge to waive the previous balance versus the upcoming balance, or the waiver might be applied to the next billing cycle. If you fell significantly behind and your account went to external collections, you could still set up a payment plan and have your bills reduced by up to 70%. We also see every corno you rent and how long you've watched it, what room, and how many times you turned it on/off. Story 30. I worked for a poker site. We had staff members who were experienced poker players playing cash games to win money from our players. Yes, they could also see what the other players had and what cards were coming on flop, turn, and river. I worked in security, so knew all about this, but was basically told I'd get sacked and get a heavy beating if it ever got out. I don't know about other sites, but the one I worked for was for sure a scam, but it's long been closed down. I left that industry a long time ago, so maybe things are better now, but if they had the ability to do stuff like that back then I'm sure they still have now. I'll stick to sports betting. Story 31. I worked at Boston Market back in the 90s when I was in high school. They're long gone now, and I'm sure things changed after I left when I went off to college. Not so much a secret, as it's something people would probably find surprising. Everything there, except for the pies and cakes, was made fresh, either made in back of house or at the commissary kitchen at one of the nearby locations. All of the proteins came in raw and were cooked on-site. Chickens came from the commissary already loaded onto the spits for the rotisserie, but all of them were cooked in the ovens you saw behind the counter. The sides were prepped fresh in the back kitchen as well. Edit. Realized the soup was also not technically fresh as the bases came from concentrate, but the chicken that was added came directly from those we cooked on site. Story 32. I started working at Enterprise Rental Cars at the end of 2019. When the pandemic hit in April of 2020, they laid a bunch of us off, then brought us back in July. Part of it was special training on how to effectively disinfect the cars between renters. They were advertising heavily that every car was sterilized between each customer. I cleaned exactly one car with the new procedure before the desk complained that I was taking too long to clean the car. I wasn't hitting their 3 cars per hour metric. All of the service agents dropped the cleaning procedures and went back to just a quick vacuum. They stopped complaining because we were hitting their vaunted 3 cars per hour cleaned metric. Also, the official policy when the oil change warning came up on the dash was to reset the mileage, so the light would be off for the customer. Those poor cars never had the oil changed unless they were otherwise in the shop for repair. Story 33. I used to work for a medical software company. One of the divisions, not mine, was using live patient data as their test data. They did nothing to anonymize it. They also did not have any of their test systems encrypted. Their office was broken into, and most of the computers were stolen, along with all the unencrypted patient data. The company didn't want to deal with the HIPAA violation fines, so they lied about what was stolen on the police report and lied about the data they were using. Story 34. I worked in casinos, and everyone knows that the slots are tricked for you to lose your money, but you can imagine how heavily it is tricked for you to lose. We had a showroom in the office with slots, and we only needed to press one button to put more money in it. We were never able to win any good amount. We even tricked the machine and played for 2 whole days in a row without any substantial gains. I was working for the biggest and best slot machines company in the world. That's why they are the best. You can win anything with the slots. Story 35. I used to work for a medical school that regularly graduated students who should not have passed. The reason, a higher graduation rate is a key metric used to attract more applicants and ultimately generate more revenue. The school required these students to sign agreements stating they would never practice as medical doctors and would instead pursue careers in research. However, enforcing these agreements is difficult, and it's likely that some individuals who should never have been licensed are now practicing medicine despite those restrictions. Story 36. I worked for a gaming wholesaler during the height of the Magic the Gathering boom. The company was already making a fortune, but the owner took it a step further. He would hold back a portion of the boxes we received, boxes that had already been pre-ordered by retail stores, then claim we had been shorted on the shipment. He'd turn around and resell those same boxes at retail prices under a different business name, back to the same stores. Say you ordered 100 boxes of cards. You'd be told, "Oops, we received fewer than expected. Here are 80 boxes." And if there was an actual shortage, he'd still pull the same trick, and you'd end up with just 60. You were paying wholesale, let's say $40 per box. If you complained to your sales rep, they'd say something like, "Well, I know a store that has some in stock." That store was actually a woman in the next office using a different phone line and pretending to be a separate company. She'd sell you the same boxes that were withheld, only now with a massive markup. Retail price might have been $100 a box while your original wholesale cost was supposed to be $40. But because of the manipulation, you were suddenly paying $400 per box and thanking this fake company for helping you out. Story 37. At Best Buy, like most retail stores these days, the primary goal of every employee is to get you to sign up for a credit card or a paid membership. If you already have both, you're often seen as less valuable from a sales perspective. Most of the products they highlight are chosen because they come with promotions tied to one of those two signups, with interest-free financing and member deals being the main selling points. Depending on the department, there are additional upsells as well. For instance, when selling a laptop, employees are expected to push Microsoft 365 in addition to the credit card and membership. If you already know what you want, the most efficient way to shop there is to place an order online for in-store pickup. Since the transaction is essentially completed, there's little to no opportunity for employees to pitch you on anything else. Story 38. I worked for a particularly infamous hemp-based wellness company, think CBD, Delta 8, HHC, and all the rest of that, not weed crap that would tout its grow processes and all natural products. We had doctors in lab coats and links to scientific studies. Not to mention there were tons of consumer reviews. We were nothing more than a marketing company, and the business was basically a website. In fact, that's probably how most of that industry is running. The owners would source some crap, then brainstorm product names. If we had 5 products for sale, it was really 1 in 5 different boxes. And the verified lab tests weren't worth the paper the PDFs were printed on. Better still, because it was so easy, the bosses would create new businesses all the time. You hate Company A and decide to switch to Company B? Guess what? Same owners, same product, different package. And all these companies are the same. During COVID, for example, they had no problem saying crap like CBD cures COVID. A study on rats showed HHC might affect opioid use disorder. Our product stops addiction. It's used car salesmen pretending to be doctors. I've seen them take the do not call list and illegally mail them promos, and so much worse. What's scary now is that these a-holes have begun selling the Kratom Synthetic 7.0. Now they're getting people hooked on real crap and treating it like some spices you buy at the bakery. Just pace yourself, they say. Stay far away from that industry. Story 39. I worked at 2 Tex-Mex restaurants. The family-owned restaurant was super popular. They had like 6 locations in town. The way the food was made was horrible. Almost everything was microwaved, and most of the food served was leftovers. Rice? Straight from the fridge? Beans? Same. Ground beef for tacos? Same. The only way you could guarantee fresh food is if it was anything that had to be grilled, like fajitas or quesadillas. The fillings were beef or chicken fajitas. Maybe the fries from the kids' menu, but that's about it. It was just sad to see the cook make some fresh rice. But instead of serving it, he would stick into the cooler, have to use the old stuff first. Order of chicken enchiladas? Use the shredded chicken that's been sitting on the fridge for the last few days. Add tomato sauce and spices, roll it into the enchiladas, cover it with more tomato soup. Add cheese, then toss it into the microwave to melt the cheese and heat up the chicken. Customer didn't finish their chips? Back into the warmer, same for the hot sauce. They cut corners everywhere and only wash the kitchen floors once a week. They're all closed now, but were very popular for a while. On the other hand, I worked at another Tex-Mex restaurant, part of a chain, not Taco Bell. Everything was made fresh every day. The head chef arrived at 7 to have everything ready by 11, and even that time wasn't enough, as we would always rush towards the opening times. At night they would throw away everything that wasn't used. The only thing we kept was ground beef, but we didn't use leftovers for tacos. We used it for filling in enchiladas. Both are now out of business, but the one who tried serving fresh food went out of business way before the other one did. Story 40. I worked for a marketing firm, and some of our biggest contracts were with major studios. For at least the past 10 years, the most common job title has been social media specialist. These specialists are often directed to focus on posting positive feedback on shows or movies that received low ratings, but had a large amount of feedback. For long-running hit series, they also focus on content creation, including memes. So basically, people who create memes about shows for fun are doing work for free, while others are being paid a fair salary to do the same thing. That big sci-fi franchise show that faced a huge backlash a while back still has paid marketers promoting it as a great show on its subreddit. Story 41. Want to put your child in preschool or daycare? Don't do it. The amount of abuse, physical harm, neglect, unethical treatment, and stupidity by a-hole employees who don't give a crap because they make $8 to $10 an hour and are not qualified because they're either still kids themselves or don't make enough to care. Mandatory reporting? In theory, yes, but in reality it often leads to instant termination for the whistleblower because they become a business liability. If you witness a teacher physically abusing, it frequently gets swept under the rug. Staff are pressured to look the other way, or are gaslit into silence. Center directors often choose to fire the employee and tell parents or authorities it was a misunderstanding rather than risk parents finding out their children are in danger. They know if word got out, parents would pull their kids and the business could shut down within a week because, obviously, no kids means no income. I'm going to be a stay-at-home dad. Story 42. I worked as a programmer for a major insurance company during the COVID pandemic. They monitored everything you did on your PC. Some of it made sense, like preventing downloads or blocking NSFW content. What didn't make sense was just how much they logged. Every keystroke was tracked, every mouse movement, every click. Your screen was being watched at all times. You were automatically set to away in Teams after 30 seconds of inactivity, and that was logged. Your laptop auto-locked after 5 minutes, and that was logged too. You had to keep your laptop on 24/7, or it was logged. USB mouse plugged in, logged. Have too many logs, and you'd get written up. About a year in, my manager came to me with, no joke, a spreadsheet listing every time my computer locked, and I was set to away auto-generated and sent for each employee. It was honestly disturbing. The spreadsheet had notes like, worker name, failed to register input for X amount of time, and other nonsense. My boss said it started during COVID, but I call BS on that. No chance they weren't doing it before. God, I hated that job. Story 43. Ad clicks are a scam. They sell you an ad budget and say you bought $350 worth of clicks for the month. So, let's say your clicks cost $1.06 each, meaning theoretically, you would get around 320 new visitors to your page every month if the entire $350 budget is used. Or if only 10 people clicked on your page, you would only have to pay $10.66, right? Wrong. They don't tell you, nor do the salespeople, that the cost per click changes depending on how many people visit your page each month, because they want that entire $350 budget to be spent. So, on day 15 or 20 of the month, if only 5 people have clicked on your page, the price per click jumps from the low $1.06 to around $25 per click, so the ad budget gets used up either way. I found this out when they were training me to be a sales team manager, and I promptly quit afterwards. Story 44. I worked in a family-owned chain of greenhouses and garden stores for a few summers. The staff up front were mostly kids getting paid a flat rate barely above minimum wage. The back staff was 98% illegal immigrants who did most of the growing and wholesaling operations. They also had a hidden marijuana patch out behind the grow houses. If people couldn't find the plant or flower they wanted, we'd go look in the grow houses to see if we had more, but if I already knew we didn't have any, I'd just step out back for 5 minutes before I came back in to tell them that unfortunately we were out of stock. There are a surprising number of people that will look for a plant in a particular color they want, never mind the fact that those plants might not even exist in that color. Also, genuine blue flowers are very, very rare. Most are yellow, white, red, orange, or purple. They were also running some kind of drop-shipping online business on the side because the warehouses out back had all kinds of random crap, from FM radios to first aid kits, to crappy Chinese stuffed animals and toys to grills and golf clubs and crap. Story 45. My first job was at a party rental company. We handled tables, chairs, bounce castles, cotton candy machines, and some basic lighting equipment. I was scheduled to work a weekend birthday party, where I had to watch the kids in the bounce castle and run the cotton candy machine. I showed up at 7 in the morning, loaded all the gear onto the truck, got dropped off, set everything up, and worked the event until 4 in the afternoon. Then I started breaking everything down, got picked up at 6 and headed back to the warehouse to clean the bounce castle and put everything away. By the time I finished, it was 9 at night. That whole day, the only thing I ate was little bits of cotton candy sneaked when no one was looking, plus water from my bottle. When it came to get paid, the owner told me I didn't perform well enough, so instead of $7 an hour, he was only going to pay me $4 an hour. Plus, he said he'd only pay me for 8 hours since that's how long the event lasted. I had no idea about labor laws, which is probably why schools don't teach you that stuff, so I just accepted it and moved on. I quit the day he made me sit in his office with his 3 kids while he went out to dinner with his wife. And of course I didn't get paid for that time either. Just 3 weeks into the job. Story 46. Fidelity Investments scoops up small companies, runs them into the ground while dancing on the edge of legality, and when trouble hits, they spin those companies off into separate entities to dodge any real consequences. They don't just steal wages from their employees and demand mandatory unpaid overtime. They hold back the last paychecks of the year twice until after SEC filings to artificially boost their annual numbers. On top of that, they collect charitable donations from employees, write them off as company donations, which landed them in hot water with their auditors, and even pressure employees to break the law. They mandated illegal business practices. At my company, we were required to pressure appraisers to inflate property values whenever Wells Fargo, Bank of America, or other major clients demanded it. When the crap hit the fan and the housing market crashed, the old white man who was our president vanished. They promoted some random woman from a cubicle to president, but all she did was take the heat for the old man's illegal actions. She even had to testify before Congress. Then they laid off 70% of the staff, merged our company with another similar one they had done the same to, demoted that temporary president back to her cubicle, and declared the entire business line was now under Fidelity National Information Services. Officially, it was a completely separate entity, even though it was the same handful of old men running the C-suite, and so they weren't held responsible for any of the crimes. Story 47. At a school I worked at, the principal did some shady stuff. So did another employee. 1. The parent-teacher organization put together several large themed gift baskets, game night, movie night, art supplies, and more. They were genuinely impressive. The plan was to hold a daily drawing during the morning live stream announcements, where the principal would pull a student's name to win one of the baskets. Every student in the school was supposed to be entered into the drawing with names printed out and randomly selected until all the baskets had been given away. However, the principal quietly instructed the office to only include the names of students who qualified for free or reduced lunch. Her reasoning? That the other students didn't need to win. It was presented as a school-wide giveaway, but in reality, many kids, including my own 2 children, were never even given a fair chance. 2. Each year, the staff and faculty would nominate their peers for Employee of the Year. The top 3 nominees were then asked to write a short personal essay, and a final vote would determine the winner. One year, while the principal was counting the final votes where it was blatantly clear that one person had won by a landslide, I saw her toss that individual's essay and vote tally straight into the trash. She gave the award to someone she personally preferred instead. I was the only one who witnessed it, and I was too afraid to speak up. 3. We had a large Hispanic population at our school, and one of the ladies in the front office was Hispanic as well. Every school year when Hispanic parents came in, and only if she personally liked them, she would hand them a free and reduced lunch application and tell them exactly what dollar amount to write for their household income, knowing that specific figure would guarantee approval. This happened even when the families earned significantly more and clearly didn't qualify. There was no requirement to provide proof of income. I reported it to the principal, and she simply shrugged it off. 4. We had a large Hispanic population in our school. We had a lady in the office who was Hispanic. Each school year when Hispanic parents came in, and if she liked them, she would give them a student-free and reduced lunch form and tell them exactly what dollar amount to put for the household income, knowing that amount would qualify them, even if they made more money and didn't need it. There was never any requirement to prove their income. I told the principal, and she shrugged it off. This same lady was greedy as hell. Whenever community members donated extra school supplies, toys, or games to the school, she would always be the first to go through the items. Instead of making sure they got to the students who actually needed them, she would take the best things for herself just to give them to her grandkids, who weren't even old enough to attend school. Whenever the PTO bought lunch for the staff, she was always the first to rush in and pile up food on her plate. She'd claim she was taking extra to set aside for the custodians, but in reality she was taking it home for herself. Teachers with later lunch periods were often left with little to no food. Eventually, the PTO had to start staying during lunch and serving the food themselves just to make sure everyone actually got a fair share. Story 48. At a production home builder, we had maybe a dozen different basic foundation plans, then multitudes more floor plans inside that basic framework. While I worked there, the following happened. 1. We dug a foundation, poured the foundation, built the floors, and began building the walls on the wrong lot. 2. Because we had very similar foundation layouts and wall layouts, shortly after the wrong lot fiasco, we put the wrong roof on a house. 3. The company had its own subreddit comprised of pissed-off customers. 4. The company assumed HOA responsibilities until an electric fire burned down the community pool house. The company fired the HOA president. He still retained employment at the company and hired a replacement, which according to the bylaws of the HOA nullified any agreements, because the responsible party, the first guy, was no longer there. The company then sued the HOA and forced the homeowners to pay damages. 5. That whole Flint water crisis thing, we swooped in and bought up tons of land on the cheap, since nobody was moving there. No biggie on that one. The worst part for me was lying to our customers in Genesee County on the Flint water system, though not in the city of Flint proper. Story 49. I used to work at Red Lobster's corporate office, and aside from shrimp, their standards were incredibly high. Some people dismiss them as the Walmart of seafood, but that couldn't be further from the truth. They went to great lengths to ensure their seafood was top quality. For instance, if a fishing boat was out for 2 weeks, Red Lobster would only buy the catch from the last 2 days. And if a country's own standards didn't meet Red Lobster's, they would negotiate to establish a higher mutually agreed-upon standard. I ended up quitting after the pandemic, when the longtime CEO left and things started to decline, so I'm not sure if they still maintain those standards today. The food you see in Red Lobster's advertising is exactly how it should look in the restaurant. We put a lot of effort into making sure the dishes were both delicious and visually appealing. All the commercials were filmed using real food, no gimmicks or fake props. The chefs cooked fresh dishes continuously on site during the shoots, so what you saw on TV and in ads was genuine. The problem is that when customers visit the restaurant and find the food doesn't match the ads, it's usually an operations issue. Managers and miss not holding their teams accountable at the location level, but ideally, the food should look just as good in person as it does on screen. Story 50. Banks face near-constant attacks from cybercriminals trying to brute force logins. No surprise there. But what's really striking is how amateurish many of these attempts are. SQL injections that haven't worked in decades, brute force attacks that fail because of 2FA, and hacking attempts from countries that are automatically blocked. I'm looking at you, Bulgaria. You can even tell when certain attackers start and stop at the exact same time every day. They're so persistent and widespread that, for the most part, the bank just blocks them at the login level rather than trying to shut down the traffic entirely. But when the attacks get intense enough to hog bandwidth and slow down real customers, that's when they're forced to take more serious action. Also, the biggest shopping day of the year was never Black Friday, it's the Friday before Christmas. On April 15th, when stimulus checks went out a couple of years ago, people were checking their bank accounts so often to see when the money hit that it created too much traffic to handle, and systems went down. The traffic was 6 times higher than the previous busiest day. Story 51. I used to work for Sears Credit in the late 1990s and early 2000s. There was a secret method to magically reset a customer's credit history and boost their credit score positively. I handled customer calls for all their credit products. Many of the calls were pretty straightforward: address changes, promotional APRs not applied, and so on. We used a system called TSYS, which is still around and widely used today in many other businesses. Back then, you navigated all its functions using the keyboard, no mouse, on a black screen with green text. It turned out another team discovered a glitch, and the knowledge quietly spread. Basically, we had an unauthorized ability to reset a customer's credit. This meant we could wipe any past due amounts and late fees, resetting their payment history so it appeared on their credit report as if they had a perfect payment record for the past 7 years. Doing this would reset everything, Sears related with the 3 main credit bureaus. Keep in mind that at the time, Sears was the 8th largest bank in the United States, and for many people their Sears card was their first credit card. As a result, it had a significant impact on their credit score since the length of credit history factors into scoring. It wasn't uncommon for people to have a 30-year credit history with Sears. Also back then, credit was like the Wild West. Things like universal default and massive interest rate hikes due to one missed payment, for example potentially doubling your rate for being just 24 hours late, were common among other things. However, any action we took would become a permanent part of the internal account history, including documentation of the call itself. So our fingerprints were all over their records, meaning we had to be very careful. The hack involved being on one particular screen for something random. I can't quite remember what, but it was something like the screen used to send a statement. While there, you would simultaneously press 5 or 6 keys together like F12, K, Shift, L and Escape, and presto, a credit reset was performed. We all knew you could get fired if caught, especially if a supervisor was watching over your shoulder, so it wasn't used often. Every once in a while I'd get a customer who had fallen behind or had been wronged through no fault of their own or was going through some tragic or sad circumstances. I could review all their payment history to verify they were honest customers, and if their story didn't set off my BS meter, and they were nice, I would sometimes discreetly perform this maneuver for them. I figured since I pray to the God of second chances, it was only right to grant someone else's prayer. I wasn't the only one who did this either. This experience also taught me to always be nice and courteous to customer service representatives, because sometimes those frontline workers can pull more strings for you than you realize. I never got caught, and was eventually promoted away from the phones. I later heard that Sears eventually discovered the glitch and patched it, so it was no longer available. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.